Have you ever heard of anyone named Mattia Murda? Maybe not, but apparently,
I just want to be clear, I'm really bad with names. And so I'm always like, I don't want to agree or disagree because nothing would horrify me more as an educator than if like this was one of my like students that I like was beloved, and like now that I know I have ADHD, like my memory through the pandemic has been going. So the honest answer is I'm not going to respond and you can tell
if
me who they
if
are.
this person was your student, they would probably not be alive anymore. This is they came up randomly when I was searching things today, and they work for Rebel News apparently, or at least have written for Rebel News. Uh, and I was like, they write for Rebel News, and apparently, I guess they have like some articles on their like website or whatever. But this was the first time that I've seen someone like super connected to Ezra that is super pro life. So this person, it says, this Matea Murda is a pro family NGO United Nations rep, global policy and advocacy advisor, and works for is the president of Vote Family Canada.
Okay.
I don't now Vote Family Canada has 4 followers.
Yeah.
They also have a website.
uh, but yes, and some of the shit that they post is very transphobic and terrifying. But
Is this Tanya Granick Allen's national version of her organization? Let's find out.
I don't know, but you could tell. I mean, we could get into the Texas thing in a bit, but if you want to give us some info on the Canadian
What is this person's name?
anti-abortionists, Matea Murda, Matteamerta.
Hey, wow, that was really fast.
Oh, Matt.
I can post it in the voice chat text if that would be.
I don't know if they
helpful.
can. Maybe on the Discord.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need to know this person specifically. You can look into that.
I know, but now I want to know who they are. Like, I want to know who they're connected with. Anyways, I googled it,
yeah.
didn't come up right away. Very upsetting.
But
I'm posting it in voice chat text now.
because I think like part of it, I mean, everyone thinks to a certain degree, and I think to a certain degree we're in a better state than America is, considering what's happening in Texas. But I think a lot of people also assume that uh, we're perfect when it comes to abortion and access. And so I don't know if you want to disabuse my audience of that, or at least tell them what's up, Canadian speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm sure folks know that abortion already did come up and was a big talking point during the federal election in Canada. If you are in Canada, day two, that was the big conversation about whether or not Aaron O'Toole was pro-choice, whether or not his party, with their anti-abortion MPs, were going to be a problem. And I know so I've been on the show before, so I'm happy, like, if folks have specific questions and want to type them in the chat, like, rather than kind of starting from the beginning, I will share my thoughts on the election specifically around this. So
far, we've just gotten a broad question, which is abortion rights in danger in Canada?
So the answer to this question is complicated, but I personally believe no. However, as a historian, I don't want to be on the record saying that, because if in 30 years I'm wrong, I will be very upset. But I have a lot of evidence and really just the history of abortion rights in Canada as contrasting to the United States that will help me answer that for you. So Canada is one of the only countries in the world. It's the only country that has this for a good reason, where abortion is not regulated by the law. And what that means is, so we had our history, folks will be very familiar or more familiar with the history of the United States. So 1973 is Roe v. Wade. Our big anniversary year, as far as our law changing and abortion being made legal, is 1988. And so that's a 15-year difference. And it's important to acknowledge and understand what happens in the two countries that's different in those 15 years. because the US, and when we talk about Texas in a second, all the fights around abortion rights are happening through the courts, through the law, rather than in the medical community. As far as like, it's not that it's like the difference, so it's not that doctors aren't involved in these legal battles, but the right to an abortion is being fought through the courts. So something happens, and then we need to challenge this through the courts, whether it's the right or the left on this issue. Whereas in Canada, what they did, so abortion here is decriminalized in 1968, the same year that homosexuality becomes decriminalized. And if folks know this history, they'll know that that is a liberal policy under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, where essentially it's not like the Liberals get all of this credit for the 68-69 omnibus bill, but it didn't actually do all of the things as far as symbolism that we say that it does. So yes, it legalizes birth control. So birth control is legal for the first time in Canada, which is one of the most important moments in Canadian feminist history. But that doesn't mean that birth control is easily accessible to people. It doesn't mean that doctors are given the information to be able to like support their patients having it. It's just that it's decriminalized. And so in that same omnibus bill, they set up, so abortion was illegal at that point. It had been illegal since, I think, 1881, so late second half of the 19th century, 1891, the criminal code. So there's this kind of swelling of people in the 60s where essentially doctors and then also activists are like, we need access to abortion in some way because it's illegal and people are dying. And so they set up what's called therapeutic abortion committees through the hospitals, which is this really weird, and this is why I say our history is different, because essentially the law says that in order to get an abortion in Canada, you have to go in front of a panel of 3 doctors who all have to agree that you can have that abortion because it is a threat to the mother's health. And so essentially, and they put that on the hospitals themselves. So depending on where you lived in Canada from 1968 to 1988, it would depend on what the process for this would look like. So some hospitals just refused to set up the committees because they were anti-choice and they were like, why would we bother doing that? Some hospitals, the committees were a formality where it was just like 3 doctors would sign it, boom, boom, boom. I know London, that's part of why London has such a good abortion clinic still, because Dr. Fellows, who was there, was a real advocate for this, and he basically like got his colleagues to just like agree, and so he could do it because he understood the importance of being able to provide that procedure for people.
I have a random question. Like, did this ever like
Yes.
cause like problems in like northern areas where like I can imagine you only have a couple doctors, and probably not all of them are on staff at like one time to all be there to like sign off on an abortion if it needs to happen.
I don't know if therapeutic abortion clinics committees were ever set up in the northern hospitals. Abortion access in northern and rural Canada is still terrible, and that's where basically this story ends up going, is that by creating this system, we create inequitable. Depends on what the hospital itself wants to do. And so there are some hospitals where you do have to go in front of the committee and essentially plead your case and show that it is going to have a detriment on you and your life if you continue this pregnancy to term. And so that upsets Canadian feminists who are a part of the women's liberation movement, the social movements of the 1960s, and they are very actually anti-capitalist as well. And so they launch this amazing protest called the 1970 Abortion Caravan from Vancouver. It's a bunch of students at SFU plus some other women in the community from the Vancouver Women's Caucus. And they march from Vancouver to Ottawa, and they're the only group of protesters who has ever shut down Parliament. So they sneak chains into the parliamentary gallery. Yes, if you don't know this story, it is so cool, and they don't want you to know it because it's like honestly, one of the best protests that I think has happened anywhere. and they manage to, Trudeau is not there because he doesn't want to talk to them. And so they managed to shut down the parliament for the day, and then eventually do meet Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Vancouver, who essentially tells them that the bill is enough. And they say, but what about poor women? What about women who are single moms? What about this? And he says, I don't care. And so that happens in 1970, and that is the start of what I would call the abortion rights movement in Canada.
Oh no! Oh no, Robyn imploded in the middle of that. Sad. See, what happened is I said, like father, like son, and then Trudeau immediately cut the feed.
Cease's got her. Oh my god.
You made the comment about Trudeau's father saying he doesn't care. And then I said, like father, like son, and then you cut out.
Wow, you know what? And that would have been fine. That would have been an okay end to the night if everyone just knew about the abortion caravan, which, P.S., if folks want to learn more about this, I edited, last year was the 50th anniversary of the abortion caravan, and part of my work as an activist was I edited 10 position papers that essentially look at where the movement has come from, tell the history, and then also offer calls to action as far as things that I think the reproductive justice movement should be doing in Canada today. I was part of
it was a good read.
A coalition of folks, a coalition of feminists who wrote that, which was awesome. But I was one of the editors.
I enjoyed it. It was a good read.
But yeah, we anyway, so that happens in 1970, and it's a big deal. But essentially, like, so that's 3 years before Roe v. Wade, where Roe v. Wade is winding its way through the courts at that point. But Roe v. Wade happens because they bring a court case forward in the United States that goes up to the Supreme Court to make abortion legal. Whereas what they end up doing in Canada to fix this law is building a movement. And so they start to talk to people, everyone, about, because the reason, like the abortion caravan, they picked abortion not because they thought that that was the be-all, end-all only issue that mattered. They picked it because they recognized that people's bodily autonomy and control over their reproductive health was vital as far as their economic freedom and their social freedom and all of these pieces. Because if you cannot choose when you want to have children, that keeps a lot of people trapped in really toxic relationships. It's a housing issue sometimes. It's a financial issue. Like, there's just so many things. And so they talked about it that way. And then throughout the 70s, Dr. Henry Morgenthaler, who will eventually be the doctor who becomes the face of the case in Canada, is performing abortions in Quebec. Because Quebec was more liberal with its social attitudes at this point. The Quiet Revolution had just happened. And so he's just performing abortions. He keeps getting arrested. And basically the courts and the juries find him, basically say, like, this is ridiculous. Like, it's not even that they find him innocent. They're like, this makes no sense with where our society is at. And so he spends some time in prison, but he's always released. And the community essentially starts supporting him. Like, there's a moment at the end of Judy Rebick's book, Heroes in My Head, one of the chapters, and Judy Rebick is a prominent Canadian socialist, founder of the Rabble media, not the Rebel, Rabble.
Rabble, way better than the Rebel.
And a national feminist leader. She is one of the women who is organizing alongside Morgenthaler, and she's has this amazing quote that one day I'm going to embroider that basically says that the cops are against us, the politicians are against us, but the people, Judy, the people are with us, because the state starts to arrest him, and eventually there are some feminists in Ontario who think, okay, if we can get him to open a clinic in Toronto, and this is in the early 80s, we can finally challenge this at the Supreme Court, because they have already done the work to change society and have enough conversations that they know that Canada is pro-choice. So they don't start with the court case. There's 15 years of work that happens before that's even a possibility. And then it's not until the mid 80s that basically they convince Morgenthaler, because he was just going to keep working in Quebec doing his thing. People were flying in to see him. Like, that's what he cared about. They convince him to open the Toronto Morgenthaler Clinic, and that clinic is protested. All of these things, but that is what leads to the Supreme Court decision in 1988, which is not an affirmation. Like, there are parts of it that say that, like, it's a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to not give access to abortion. And that's the other thing that happens in that time, is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms did not exist in 1970. It is 1982 that is passed. And so with that is what happens that then leads to this decision, because the women, the organizers who are a part of the Ontario Coalition of Abortion Clinics, recognize that that's their shot because of those new rights that have been defined as a part of the Canadian Constitution. And so essentially, the difference then is that our rights were not gained at the courts, they were gained in the streets. And so we organized first across Canada, and then when the abortion law is struck down in 1988, there is no abortion law in Canada, technically. That's something that the anti-choicers will say, but it's a negative law. Like, there is a law on the books, it just is not valid because of that court case, and there doesn't need to be. Like, it's the same, like, we don't need laws around pancreas surgery or, like, liver functions or whatever. Like, we trust the medical community to do this, and so the Society of Gynecologists and various medical like boards, the same groups that make sure that, like, when you have heart surgery, that the dude is doing the heart surgery correct, that those same medical protections exist around abortion in Canada, and they have since 1988. And so a lot hasn't really changed since 88. I'm happy to, like, talk about those nuances, and but that's why in my opinion, we now find ourselves in this abortion access crisis, because no effort was made by the government, apart from avoiding reopening this debate, to actually ensure that every single person across Canada could get access to abortion when they needed it. And a lot of reproductive health units, particularly nurses, can be anti-choice because they go into it thinking, oh, I love babies, I'm a maternity ward nurse. And then those ideas of misogyny, etc., are embedded into our society and our medical school programs until very recently. And so that is allowed to continue, even though it is a violation of someone's rights to deny them that service.
What are some of the ways that access is being sort of, like, limited? I don't know if you can hear me there.
I heard a little bit, sorry. My roommates are now having a discussion about our, what's it called, internet situation, because me and new roommate are getting a little annoyed. I started a new job, and this has happened to me, like, once a day, and, like, I can't anymore. I've got tech. My parents used to call it Robyn-citis when the internet doesn't work. I think it's my ADHD, but, like, just not. I'm very grumpy.
No, this is definitely the internet service provider, or the speed and all that. Like, I'll just say, like,
we have tech savvy, and we need to just switch to one of the evil empires to, like, get it so they don't friggin' downgrade our service all the time.
So I have tech savvy, and they're working with, like, everything works smoothly right now. The issue I had was we had streams just kept dropping at the end of the stream. So I would be in the middle of streaming, and if my internet goes out, like, the whole fucking show shuts down.
Yeah.
But I purchased a new router.
Chat doesn't for a while.
Yeah, it's weird because I could stream for a bit, I just can't use the internet for a bit, and then eventually goes. Either way, turns out it was a router issue. I purchased a new router, and now everything's, like, clean sailing. But that being said,
see, it's sometimes. It's sometimes fun when you crash, though, because, like, then it'll just be, like, me and the people typing in chat being like, oh, whoa, he exploded, like, he's dead, blah, 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 for, like, 5 minutes until you finally, like, check your phone or, like, go on Discord and say, like, at everyone, I died, sorry, or whatever. So it's just kind of a little, like...
It's not
it's fun in chat, you know? It's like when the teacher leaves.
for the same reason it probably wasn't fun for Robyn, which is like you're into it, you're going, you got all this power behind what you're saying, and then it's just like, and then it's like it's just so deflating.
No, it sucks.
So deflating. But anyways, what I had asked you was, what are some of the like ways that access is being like restricted in Canada?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's not that access is necessarily like no one is actively doing this necessarily. It's that it's being in this, like, it's deprioritized in our funding, in our things, and in our by our medical schools. So it's a systematic issue is what I'm saying. So it's not an individual, like, I think that that's also an interesting contrast with the US, where like the anti-choicers will often target specific clinics. So when I was doing some prep for tonight, I was reading about like how in Kansas they targeted specific the Dr. George Tiller's clinic for most of the 2000s years, which for folks who don't know, Dr. George Tiller was the last abortion provider to be assassinated point blank by an anti-choicer in the United States, and that happened because he is a later term provider, so he was one of like 4 people who could do a very specialized form of abortion, because the further along in gestation you go, the more specific those surgical skills become, in the same way that like if you have a more complicated brain surgery, like not everyone can do it, right? And so that's actually one of the ways access is restricted in Canada. That's been a real issue. London, Toronto, and Vancouver are the only sites, or have been the only sites, and then one place in Quebec, where later term access, so past 20 weeks, is accessible. And so that means that if you live outside of Ontario, you are probably, and in the Maritimes, you are probably flying to London in order to get your abortion. And oftentimes when it's these later cases, there's lots of different reasons. I find the idea of the perfect abortion victim to be really problematic. Like the idea that some people like, oh, well, like this abortion was better than this one. Like these reasons are valid and these ones aren't. Like they're all valid. It's all a hard decision. Or maybe it's not, but it's none of your business. But if you get further along in your pregnancy, obviously, those cases are often the most heartbreaking, because sometimes it can be cases where the fetus is not viable at all. And so really, like you've been carrying this wanted pregnancy and then you're being forced to make that choice and also having to travel. And prior to this past year, anyone past 24 weeks would have to fly to the United States, which is also why this US stuff is really scary, because there was a bill trying to block one of the clinics that we use in Colorado this past November. So that's a big thing, is just like, where are the clinics located, who has access, certain hospitals, rural hospitals in particular, like abortion, the stigma around abortion in those communities and how conservative they can be will mean that providers don't want to say that they do abortions. I've been finding, just to go on a separate rant, I've been finding the conversations around hospital protests extremely frustrating, because there are people who are speaking out about it now, and it's a lot of really prominent doctors who are like, we're tired, why are you protesting our hospitals? Sorry, where was your voice for the last 30 years? Because that is something that's been happening across Canada. There are hospital protests all the time. I'm from 2 communities that are like that. There's one in Kelowna every single Tuesday, they're out there. So why do you think Kelowna is the anti-mask capital of BC?
My audience saw the pictures that I posted on Monday, of the anti-maskers and anti-vaccine people who were standing around Victoria Hospital. But like, as you're pointing out, we had the fetus brigade
I've seen
out on that corner. Yeah, that corner. Like,
no, it's the same spot.
Yeah, and so it is. I mean, the only thing that I can say, and this doesn't take away from your point, because they should be just as outraged at that they are about this. But like, there's also like the number games that are like concerning, because the least you can say about the anti-abortion people is that there's usually only a handful of them there, thankfully. It was a little concerning on Monday when there was probably over 100 anti-maskers out in front of the hospital.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where like the more we allow it to become acceptable, right? Like those ideas, the anti-abortion movement, and this is something that myself and other reproductive justice activists have been saying across North America for several years, is that the tactics that we're seeing the far right using are coming from our movement, and by that I mean like the anti-choice movement is a few years ahead because they are white supremacists, even though they don't say it openly the same way that other people do. Because who do you think they don't want having babies, and who do you think they do want having babies? It's gross. I've been to an anti-abortion event where they made a joke about how eventually we would all be replaced because anti-choicers are very fertile, and I was like, well. I'm sorry that you want your like 18 children. I find that weird. You do you, like, no shaming on people, like I believe in people's choice, but like when it's like a weird thing that you're like getting off on, like it
no hard shame on our channel for the Quiverful movement. That can anyways.
But yeah, and it's the same, like the anti-science part of it, right? Like in a lot of the materials that we see from the anti-abortion movement in Canada is stuff that was developed out of the United States in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as far as like stealing pictures, patient files, ultrasound records from clinics. Like genuinely, like there were people in positions of power, in justice departments in southern states who used and abused their power in order to get that information from Planned Parenthood, which was not true, and then construe it in a way that allowed them to make their argument. And so none of these things are new, and it's very frustrating to see how mainstream they've become in the anti-vaccine movement and in the far right, which has existed, but like, sorry, people were like the anti-choice movement has been standing on your corner and trying to like putting notes on doctors' cars and threatening them for 30 years. So where was your outrage then? Like, when were you going to protect your colleagues for that? Because the truth is that many doctors don't feel comfortable telling their colleagues that they do abortions. So that's a cultural issue in Canadian medicine. Like, that's where access issues are. It's not like, it's that Canadian polite benevolence thing, right? Of being like, we're not going to be totally openly disgusting. We're just going to be secretly disgusting behind closed doors so that way we look like we're better.
It's also a lack of seeing how these things are all connected. Because you look at the anti-vaccine, anti-mask community, and they're largely anti-abortion people too. Like, these movements are not dissimilar at all.
And it's scary. No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I mean, you can expand on that as well, but then also touch on, I'm curious your thoughts on how that movement has even started adopting a like pro-choice language, in that is my body, my choice when it comes to the getting a vaccine or not, and yet there's still the types of people who are against abortion. It's wild to me, and like we've commented on a whole bunch on the show already, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that as well.
It's disgusting, and yeah, it's like the anti-vaccine movement, even like I know, and I've met a lot of white women who are anti-vaccine for whatever reason. By that I mean like while I'm out campaigning and things or in the community. But usually it's folks who are marginalized. Like I don't blame them for that. They're getting misinformation fed to them through various channels. But it's a white supremacist, toxic masculinity. Like, their goal is to preserve an idea of the family that has never existed and to be in power and control over women. And I use that term inclusively, like we're talking about trans women as well and trans men, and the fact that folks who like bodily autonomy really applies to that issue as well. And those are so deeply connected. Like Jonathan Van Maren, who's the head of the CCBR in Canada, who's like quite a prominent person. Like he's been on the Andrew Lawton show and stuff. Like his stuff around the trans community, like he was writing the stuff that was in Maxime Bernier's speech this week, like years ago. Like he's been saying that stuff forever. And we know that like people like Jordan Peterson and stuff have been too. But the difference with the anti-choice movement is that then they get really deep into like protecting their own kids. Like it very much becomes like, well, these like a lot of it, like I've seen him talking about what's it called, drag queen like brunches, like all of those pieces, and then also like targeting, because the way the anti-abortion movement is evolving, they're also co-opting feminism now out of the US, and that's been happening for a couple years, to basically say like not just the my body my choice, but women who are saying that abortions are like devaluing their role as mothers, which again is like stuff that they are being fed by men, by male patriarchs who believe in an idea of the family and an idea of society that is built around women being essentially breeders. Like it's this like your body. And so yeah, of course it's frustrating. I think that like a lot of the kind of just followers, like people who are just showing up at these things because they're upset because of disenfranchisement and like economic issues, like the same things that led to the On to Ottawa trek and various riots in the 1930s in Canada, as far as like the last time we had a major crisis and depression and all those things. Like those people were always going to latch on to these movements, and they were, I don't think that they're saying my body, my choice in a like I don't think they know what they're saying. Does that make sense? Whereas there are people at the top who do, and they know that like that argument around bodily autonomy is grounded in the fact that men have a right to their own body and women are not supposed to. Like our bodies are supposed to be for anyone else, and it goes to like to connect it to like the Raj Saini stuff with Kitchener Center. Like it's just like all about like you do not have the right to control your own body and do what you want with it. It is the right of men in our society to do whatever they want with it. Like that is essentially what they are espousing.
Yeah, I mean you're highlighting a point here too, which has to do with like the slow creep of like radicalization. Because I think like a lot of these people on the periphery are people who are not like not as emotionally invested in it as some other people, right? But they might just be like, well, I don't know, vaccines, I'm not sure, you know? And then they'll adopt the language like my body, my choice, because let's give credit to the pro-choice movement. That's an awesome slogan. It rolls off the tongue, it's nice to shout. So it's like it was easy for them to latch onto it. But now they're like going further down that radicalization sort of like spiral. And it's not good and not fun. But
well, and it's that piece that like then it's honestly like white unhinged white male rage. Like that's what I see, and like it's that combined with like this twisted extremist form of the patriarchy that sees women as property, as needing to be in the home, as needing to ask the husband for like permission to do things like that, and seeing like pregnancy as this like joy and all of these things, which like is so problematic and so removed from like the reality of what people's lives are like, and the ways in which we should be supporting each other, and our families and our communities.
Yeah. A lot of the like right-wing conspiracy sort of like does lean on everything you're saying here. I can't remember if I might have even recommended this to you, or not recommended this to you, but brought it up the last time we talked about this. There was a great article in Mother Jones that was about how things like QAnon or even the satanic panic in the 90s is a reaction to daycares and like taking the kids out of the home. And the idea is like you want to spread panic and fear that like now these kids are leaving the mother. They're going to a daycare. You know, and so there's all these hidden cabals of like child predators everywhere, such that like no, they need to be with the mom where they're safe and in their home and stuff like this. And it came like it's should we take it as a coincidence that these movements popped up right when daycare was starting to become readily available and widespread and like, you know,
yeah, well, and that connects back to like, you know, that's my like history background is like the history of the family in North America. Like the 60s and 70s has the same fear, but it's around the absentee father, because all in the United States, so many men are drafted into the Vietnam War, and then they come back and they're disaffected, they have PTSD, alcohol, like all of these things, these issues that come from being in a war that was terrible, was never going to be won, like all of these things. And that's the fear in the 70s, is like that kids in the United States and the 60s, that's why like the baby boomer generation happened, because there weren't enough dads around, and like we need a strong father figure in the home. Like that fear comes because of the results of the Vietnam War.
Well, one point on the toxic masculinity stuff too, because I had somebody I knew who started going into the anti-vax stuff, and then threatened to open hand slap me in the face, and I was like, block. But like, there is like an element of like these movements are it's a lot of it comes from white male rage, and male rage generally, yeah.
Yeah, but the anti-science piece there is also important, right? Which is, again, where I get frustrated, because like the anti-abortion movement has been anti-science forever. Like there is no, like it is, they make their own science. To be clear to everyone, like the anti-vax movement is starting to do this too. They will continue to do it. But like the anti-abortion movement is this whole machine where like they have their own journals to publish in, their own people. And so like, and they recruit doctors in medical school, like even in Canada, like they have, because of this both sidesism and like the idea that like people can have their own beliefs but still be doctors, which I like don't agree with. Like if you do not believe in medicine and science as far as like a harm reduction approach in terms of like doing what's best for your patient no matter what, you aren't fulfilling the Hippocratic Oath, which is supposed to be the basis of all medical care and being a doctor. I don't know what that noise is.
That was motorcycles driving by my house.
Oh, hello. But anyway, so like I think about our experiences together at Western protesting Lifeline. Like there's a club that has status on campus that like any other club. So you go into the club list, Lifeline is there. What the fuck? Like why would that be like again, like that is normalizing anti-science. Like we've seen their display, like it is not grounded in reality, but they stand there in the USC and they talk to people and they tell them how this is scientific and it's in medical school books, because that's their whole thing, that every single like book of human biology says that life begins at conception, and but it's like without the humanities, like without reading into what they are actually doing and understanding those power dynamics and the origins and all of these things, like science can't cope. And it's so frustrating to have been told by various people that my views were extreme. Like that was 4 years ago. People said that to me, where I was on campus as the only person being like, what the fuck is this? And had a faculty member say that to me, as far as like me not wanting them there, being an extremist view, even though like, sorry, I would like to go about my workday and get my Starbucks like a basic white bitch that I am, without having a fetus picture slammed in my face. But that's, again, we're normalizing it, and it's because bodily autonomy, as far as people with uteruses, is the last, like we got, as far as rights are concerned, like the deep-seated misogyny that exists in our society, we have not gotten, and it's everywhere. It's in science. We have to, like, there's no research on women's bodies. It's it's insane. Like, I don't understand. I know how we got here because I'm a historian, but I'm deeply frustrated by it, because it's like I know all of the systems and how it got that way, but yet, yeah, standing there and being like, okay, so are we not like agreeing with the science from 30 years ago that said that abortion is the same as any other medical procedure, and like the ways in which our country has been like a leader around this? Like Henry Morgenthaler created the procedure that most people get in early term abortions now. Like that's like we are leaders, and yet we allow as a society for these people to just exist without essentially, and their anti-choice groups are invited into high schools. Like I know in my work previously, when I was working for the pro-choice nonprofit locally in Kitchener, like there were teachers who would invite us and the crisis pregnancy center to show both sides of the issue. And it's just like, how how are we I just like in what world would that be acceptable if it was like, let's have some race scientists in, some people who believe you're human and some people who don't, like, excuse me?
But that was getting normalized in 2016. It's amazing to like watch how like we somehow in the world started normalizing this both sidesism rather than just telling people to fuck off. And like I cut my teeth in activism in the 2000s on being like a pro-vaccine and trying to encourage people to get vaccinated because I was seeing the rise of an anti-vaccine movement. And like look at what's happening now. And like I try not to get too personally invested into it because I know it's all about structures and systems and all that fun stuff. But it's like, why wasn't anyone listening to me like for the past 20 years, you know? And then, of course, we're in this mess now, and no one friggin' did anything, you know? And
Yep.
And I don't even think, like, science can be equipped for this. In the same reason why these people are connected with the anti-trans stuff, right? There's nothing in the science textbook that tells you like what is biologically essential, because like that's meaningless to begin with. And it's the same thing with like there's nothing in a science textbook that's going to tell you like where the life begins or whatever the fuck that means, you know. And yet they get to roll with it and keep pushing these lies, you know.
Well, it's a again, that's why like I get frustrated by the devaluation of the humanities because science is not neutral. And how do we know that? Because of a lot of people who are really smart, who write things, including historians, who look at science and are critical of the ways in which it perpetuates the different systems of inequality that exist in our society. And so it is extremely, extremely frustrating when not only are you right, but also like you have the tools and skills and you know why, but those tools and skills have been so devalued by the neoliberal project, which doesn't want us to think critically. They want us to just do our STEM work or do our like you're a machine, you go to work every day and you come home and you don't think about it, as far as how we interpret these things. And abortion is just one of like I always say abortion is like the start of it. Wow, when you go into like the misogyny in just pregnancy generally and like the ways in which we talk about pregnancy, the lack of research, like it is mind-boggling how little we actually know. And by that I mean science and like gynecologists. I would say most midwives know a lot. I am a friend of midwives, and they are great, and I want more midwives. But that is an act of decolonization, right? Because midwives used to be in charge of all reproductive care, and it was through modernization, colonization, capitalism, and that happening in the 19th and early 20th century that essentially women were removed from the act of childbirth as expert and became objects to be researched upon. Like when early settlers came to Canada, who the fuck do you think helped them give birth? Indigenous midwives. Who helped them get abortions? Indigenous midwives. Who like took care of the community? Indigenous midwives. And so like it was through devaluing women's labor in the medical field and the rise of that like modern expert, whatever that means, that like we started to see patriarchy being completely embedded in our reproductive health care. And that is why like just the bare minimum of like asking for consent and wanting access to accurate information is like where we're at in 2021, and that's fucking sad.
And as someone who you know, had a wife who went through like 2 pregnancies, but trying to find like, I at least knew, I guess, how actually I should say, Muta Supreme, thank you for the gifted sub. Very kind of you. I almost forgot about it because it happened earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt your flow. So
that's okay.
So I interrupted mine instead.
You can interrupt me anytime, Jody, and I'll tell you if I am okay with it or not.
What? I liked it, so I didn't. Not going to interrupt what I like, you know. I at least had some sort of knowledge base to approach how to find good information, and I knew who to ask and what questions to ask. But like, I can't imagine if I was a parent or an expecting parent, to know what information to even look for or where to start. Like, it is so overwhelming. Like, even just going to a bookstore and being like bombarded with like all kinds of like weird parenting techniques, just an assortment, none of which have been vetted, none of which have been scientifically studied. Just some like crank who's just like, I raised my kids by only having them play with cotton toys, and now and it's like, I can't like other parents, like it's astonishing, and it's become its own industry too. It's terrifying.
Well, but like the thing that's sad is like so much of that, it's like what you just said is like about parenting, right? Like, it's not about the woman. It's not about pregnancy. It is about the child, and not about supporting the pregnant person as far as their development and well-being, their transition to parenthood and how difficult that can be. Honest facts and information about things like breastfeeding and chest feeding, which like are very valuable but are also incredibly hard. Like, I haven't done it obviously, but I've heard from all of my like people who have had children that it fucking hurts and that it is very difficult, and that like it's a very hard experience because you're like, our hospitals have also gotten so bad that, and by that I don't mean like no one is like having, like, there are things that are happening that are terrible, but what I'm actually by that I mean like Indigenous people having their kids apprehended, like all of those systematic issues also exist in Canada, just so everyone is aware. But the very real hospital system issue of the fact that there are not enough beds for the amount of population that we have, in terms of like giving pregnant people time to recover, is like across the board. So not only is there racism, is there classism, is there possibly transphobia, if they're homophobia, if you're a part of a queer family, like all of these things that compound around what your reproductive experience is going to be like when you go into the hospital system to have a hospital birth. But there is also just the systematic underfunding of that system that means that no one is getting good care anymore.
And I'll say, like, it was interesting too, like with the 2 kids, because Grand is it Grand River in Kitchener? Their experience,
Grand River Hospital.
Their experience was phenomenal. Their education on breastfeeding and stuff like this, like looking up, they're legit. They do their stuff. It
doesn't exist anymore, Jody. That program was cut, just to be clear for everyone. That is
terrifying, because that was a very wonderful and helpful experience. And not only that's like contrasting that to like Victoria Hospital, where we had our second, it was less of that. It was like maybe some of it wasn't I guess available because it was our second. They figured we already knew stuff or whatever, but it was a lot more cold and like through the motions kind of thing. But then it was also too I mean, I don't want to make it about me, but I am going to make it about me because I personally experienced this. But it's even like subtle things of like, you would want both parents to bond with the child, and or like if there are both parents around, to have that experience. And it was almost like they set up the experience such that like the man or the father or non-binary parent had to leave, which is like the weirdest thing ever. And like,
I've heard nothing but negative experience. Like, I've heard some good experiences, obviously, but I've heard a lot of horror stories about that birth unit in Victoria Hospital. Not the abortion clinic. Abortion clinic are angels. I love them. They are the best. But those are two separate floors, two separate units, different people. I'm talking about like you are giving birth in the maternity. Yeah, I've heard a lot of stuff like that.
But I mean, otherwise, I mean, the child came and all that was fun, and
Wow,
now she screams at me, and but I love her.
so good, so good. What a great time for you.
No, she's totally going to be an activist one day, so that's good. Passing
Let's hope
the
an
lineage
activist, or hopefully she's not an anti-vax activist. Let's hope it isn't one of those situations. That would be so upsetting for you.
Oh no, yeah. If they rebel by becoming like a conservative,
Yeah, it could happen, Jody. This is why offspring are a gamble.
Listen, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna hopefully fund them into the appropriate peer group. Usually they're shaped by their peers, and
you just need to read all those books you were just talking about. Get them all.
Tim,
I'll start being their cool babysitter.
Yeah.
And I'll take them to their first protests that they remember, because I bet they don't remember the ones.
What you gotta do is find them like young adult versions of Karl Marx.
I'm right here.
Yeah.
There we go. Wow, Jody.
Yeah. And then you could read the novels to them. Like it'll be beautiful. But by the time they're young adults, I assume you're not going to be where you are now. You are going to age like the rest of us.
No. I'm going to go into cryo right now just to come out.
And if you want to support this venture, go to this GoFundMe. It's down here. Just kidding. That's
if you want to help me cryo freeze so that I can I'm just going to send our little Patreon and
if you want to cryo help me,
what's out there?
Help me cryo freeze.
Please.
Yeah, that's the like highest stage of our Patreon now. It's $200 a month.
Tim,
it's really important. That's for all of the electrical costs that it's going to take for us to keep you alive until that like I'm imagining the machine itself will need a seed starting money for that, but then just like the cost of keeping you alive once it's all plugged in, like that's going to be a very high hydro bill. And we know that the Liberals privatized Hydro One, so it's going to keep going up. So that's what we need. Your Patreon dollars, folks.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we need the constant funds. We don't just need one-time donations. We need consistent and constant funding in order to fund
month, we might
my project to cryo freeze.
Take over
just to unfreeze every once in a while. Yeah, we have 2 policy proposals coming out of this evening so far for the NDP. 50% off food Monday to Wednesday. And give me money to cryo freeze.
Solid.
I mean,
and like, I'm sure we can come up some. Yeah, so we could probably come up with some good ones. Otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of asking Shirk for money for things. That's dear Shirk, I have a proposal for you. Some money for cryo freezing. This will lead to X.
Muta Supreme in chat goes, I'm a single issue voter around Cryo Vienna.
Right?
Whichever party offers it to me.
Oh. There was one last thing before we move off the topic of abortion. Although we already did that with the Cryo.
We haven't even talked about Texas yet. What? We literally have only talked about access and not even that well, folks. I will say this is my lead. I'm not making sense. Who knows what's coming out of my mouth?
No, it's been wonderful. It didn't have to be coherent. That's the thing. I mean, I was thinking of making it a more of a formal interview, but then when you came out and be like, I want to talk about everything, and I was like, I'm down for just chit-chatting. I think it's been wonderful. We've had a pretty decent-sized audience the whole time, so I don't think anyone cares. I mean, the only reason I wanted to talk about Texas is because it was topical, but at the same time, we're Canadian, so I was like, I wanted to make it about Canada anyways. Because like I feel like I do feel like that a large portion of like people within Canada Oh my god, I think a large portion of people in Canada think, or it's not at the forefront of their mind, right? And so this has made it in the forefront of everyone's mind for how drastic thing has gone. And so I just wanted to sort of like, I don't know, make people more aware of what's happening in Canada. I mean, the Texas thing, I don't know if you want to like talk on the Texas thing. It's just depressing as well.
So I guess like I've just been rambling about different access issues that exist in Canada, and I did do a decent history job, so yay me. High five myself. But what I want to say is that in recent years, so I've been doing this work since 2016, and I started doing this work because I saw a group in Canada called Right Now that was trying to bring the same American style tactics as far as like taking over the state legislatures, local councils, like different levels of government as far as trying to pass some sort of limitation around abortion. In Canada, recently, I think that was in May. So I know when stuff happens, but everything has been a blur with this weird COVID time in terms of when things happen in my life. But sometime recently, one conservative MP put forward a private member's bill around sex-selective abortion, which is essentially this anti-abortion myth that certain people of color choose to kill female babies. And it obviously comes from specifically like the one-child policy in China, but also like a lot of really bad misconceptions about places like India and families that are coming from Southeast Asia and their views of women. That discussion was, the Liberals were obviously very against it because they were like, oh, this is going to be like reopening the abortion debate. What I want to say, so that was a private member's bill. There's a lot of extremist private members' bills that get put forward all the time. That one wasn't great. I personally, so sex-selective abortion, just so folks know, when people bring that up, is not really a thing. And the way that we like to talk about it is like, if someone is going to, like, the problem is not the abortion then. The problem is views and how we value femininity, views and how the family values women. And so, like, if someone's not going to get an abortion and then they're going to go home and their husband's going to kill them because they didn't have a boy, like, we're not going to deny them access to healthcare, right? Like, it's not your business as to why they're choosing to not continue their family at that point. And the idea of putting that on the books specifically doesn't make sense because it's going to be used the same way that any kind of policing of medicine is, in terms of like choosing and using biases that exist in our medical system to say, oh, this person's poor, so that's why they're doing it, or this person is from this culture and that's why they're doing it, when really we don't know. And if we take a systematic approach, so essentially it was a bill to criminalize nothing because we don't actually have good data on abortion in Canada. That's something that the Liberals promised to do like 2 months before calling the election. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Liberals love the fact that the Conservatives have this anti-abortion boogeyman. And so when I started in this movement, I was like, oh no, like the Conservative Party could bring this back. They're going to do what the Americans did. And then I learned that history that I told you at the start of this. And that contrast is really important. Understanding that context is really important. And so I personally, in the last 2 years, have become very frustrated with the way that Justin Trudeau uses abortion as a way of affirming his feminism, quote unquote, but literally does nothing apart from saying I'm pro-choice, which is like saying I support gay marriage in 2021. Like, you're literally saying I'm not a terrible person. You're not saying you're pro-abortion, which means that you are expanding access. You're making sure that every hospital has it. You're making sure that, like, Action Canada, who are a charity and have a fund to fly people across Canada, are not doing that. Like, why is that not being funded by the government if the procedure is not available close to your home? That makes no sense. And essentially using it as almost this Trojan horse to distract Canadian voters and get this ABC argument. And it was scary when Andrew Scheer was the leader. Like, he is very anti-choice and extreme, and I was really scared when he became the party leader. But we look at what people like Sam Oosterhoff and him and other members who have been, quote unquote, elected by the anti-abortion movement have been able to do. And they're owning themselves, quote unquote. Like, as soon as they open their mouths, because Canadians are pro-choice, because the feminists did the work to make sure that had happened, people are so aware of these rights and how important they are. But what they aren't aware of is how bad the access is, and how, even though they have, legal does not equal accessible. So you may have that right, but if you cannot access it, you are not going to be able to get that abortion. And that is very true of rural communities, especially Indigenous communities, where like the systematic racism that they experience going into the medical system already is enough that not having that abortion close to home is what is going to mean that they just become a parent, even though they don't want to. And that's why saying I'm pro-choice is actually a cop-out from our prime minister. And it's something, like, the reason they brought it up so early in the campaign is because they're so used to saying, don't vote for Harper, keep Harper out, get rid of the Conservatives, ABC, and it's not working anymore. And I personally find it extremely offensive, because we have been asking them for money for Clinic 554, which is the former Morgenthaler Clinic in New Brunswick, for years. It flooded twice. And it wasn't funded by the province of New Brunswick, because New Brunswick still has a small law on the books that means that they don't pay for abortions that are performed outside of hospital settings. Like, i.e., if you went and got an ultrasound at a clinic in the community, this thing said, it would say no ultrasound payments for clinics in the community if you're not at the hospital. Like, it's insane. It makes no sense. And the Liberals have failed to enforce the Canada Health Act, and have now put forward in their platform that if elected this time, which, like, we know is bullshit, because they never do anything they say. They haven't repealed the blood ban. They haven't done any of it. They're going to embed in the Canada Health Act something about abortion. And people like me are like, but we are actually proud of the fact that it's not on the books as a law, because that is normal and makes sense. So why would, like, you doing this is not what we asked for. Like, essentially, they have created a policy that is not what anyone that I know in the reproductive rights movement in Canada would have advocated for. And the NDP has been very good on this issue, particularly since Jagmeet Singh became leader. To my knowledge, there is no anti-choice member of parliament. David Christopherson was the last one, and Matthew Green replaced him in 2019. So that's very exciting. And by that, I mean, like, anti-abortion old men don't mean that they're, like, actively protesting necessarily. It just means they're funding anti-choice activities too. Like, they're like, oh, everyone is fine, we're helping babies. Ridiculous. But all that to say, in Canada, the Liberals use this boogeyman of Texas, of saying this could happen here, in order to fund their re-election campaigns, fundraise, and then they do jack shit for the feminist community. There was a bunch of money for sex ed that was supposed to be flowing around this before the election, and it didn't happen, because of course it didn't happen. And so with the laws in Texas, which is like these, like, state level laws are, like, the Texas one, if folks have looked at it, is actually like, wow, like ridiculous. You can, like, it my favorite abortion rights activist in the US and writer Amani Gandhi, who's with Rewire.news, who they understand this issue better than I ever could, because they are legal experts who have only been reporting on abortion rights and the law for a decade. Basically called it the abortion snitch law, because it's that any community member, a civilian, can sue someone who is aiding and abetting an abortion. It's not the pregnant person. It's the aiding and abetting abortion, and they get $10,000, and they don't even have to live in the state. And so that is wow. Wow. And it is a weird law. But yeah, that's not gonna, like with where our legal system is at, it's not gonna happen. What will happen in Canada is people will continue to have to travel, and our medical system will continue to deteriorate if we don't substantially invest in reproductive health care. And that's where reproductive justice comes in. So more midwives doing abortions. Midwives could do Mifegymiso, and, like, the Canadian Midwives Association has advocated for them to be able to do medication abortion. So that's something that Trudeau could easily do, is figure out how to make it so that all midwives in Canada can do that, even though healthcare is at the provincial level. Like and funding the medical schools, getting them to actually train people. Like it's just very much words and not action.
I mean, the takeaways that I'm getting from you is like we need to obviously keep being actively in support of reproductive health care, including abortion, and normalize that, but also do it appropriately, knowing what's actually happening on the ground. Because I feel like part of the issue as well, which like we're touching on here, is that a lot of our information comes through an Americanized lens. And so
Yes.
and I don't think Canadians, like, as someone who taught a few classes on philosophy and law, Canadians don't know a lot about our legal system. Not only do we not know a lot about our legal system, ask most people on the street if you can name a single Supreme Court justice on the Canadian bench. I forgot them already. I probably can't name one right now, yet I could probably name every single Supreme Court justice in America, which tells you about how politicized their Supreme Court is. And so the process just to overturn abortion here in the way it's happening there is not going to happen the same way, you know.
Well, and so they are trying to do things like that. Like I have heard at like the Conservative Party, if they get in, they want to politicize more justice appointments, and I think Ford has been trying to do that a little bit, but it hasn't gotten any attention. And a really good example of someone who I am personally like, oh, did they get this job because of this as well, is the new Hallamay Norfolk medical officer of health, who tweeted a bunch of stuff about how masks weren't freedom and things, and then basically now that county in Ontario has like hired him temporarily, and they're trying to figure out how to get out of it because all these old city councilors had no idea he was like this. And so there are people in the system who are already doing the things that Canadians are afraid of. So the stuff that we're like, oh, the US is gonna block, like there are nurses who at the hospital you call and ask for abortion and they tell you we don't have it, even though they do. Like those human beings exist within our system already. There are ultrasound technicians who I know shame pregnant people and say like, well, aren't you excited and you don't want to get an abortion in their ultrasound appointment at the clinic that you're getting, like that all of us would get our ultrasounds at. Like these are not these things are happening, and that is where like the government can play a role in terms of normalizing it in our healthcare, normalizing it in our society. And in 2015 or 2014, it was a big deal that Trudeau said no Liberal MP can be anti-choice. That at the time, symbolism-wise, was a big deal, but it's the same as all of his fucking feminist stuff, where it was just, and there was no follow-through. So you can say that, and that's a great first step when your party still has men who do not support abortion and are going to vote against or are going to be having those conversations. I know for a fact, actually, and I will say this on the stream, so Raj Saini, who we mentioned earlier when we were talking about PSAN at the start, who is what was my MP until the election was called and has been my MP in Kitchener Centre for 6 years, who was he resigned around sexual harassment and assault allegations, which I believe are true. And part of why I believe they're true is because when I was a student, I was a Canada Summer Job student, and I met him at a reproductive health clinic, and the comments that he made to me as a pharmacist suggested to me that he saw abortion as something that was really important for poor women, because women just really need to, like it was so 1980s dude being like, yes, well, women need to be able to like have those things, and it was like, excuse me, like what? Like that is, we are so far past that. Like, first of all, you're a pharmacist, so why do you not know about the abortion pill, which was legalized in 2015? Like, you would think that as an MP, you would learn that stuff, you would champion it. It's a new part of your work. But also just, yeah, like seeing us as sweetie, as object, like you can sense it. You could tell that was the ideology that he was bringing into the office, even though he was, quote, a nice guy and representative of a different community than a cis white man. And so it's not enough to just have people who are saying they're pro-choice. Like, because that's actually a neutral position. We have to have folks who are willing to stand up for reproductive health, and understand that, like, this is not, like, there's no more debate around, like we need access to this because there's nothing worse than being pregnant when you don't want to be. Nothing feels worse.
I just had a smile because we've had throughout, like, I haven't mentioned out loud, but a few people in the chat have said things. I think we banned like 3 people, but this person just logged on as King James, and I was like, oh no. And then said one
Not
thing,
just
ban.
Yeah, I instantly banned them. I saw the name. I saw that the account was created September 3rd of this year. Dead. Goodbye.
Yeah. I wanted to
Anyways,
add,
continue.
we've had several comments in the chat that were kind to you, saying that you know a lot about this and they're learning a lot. So,
well, that's nice. Thanks, yes. Friends.
So they've been mostly friends.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, that doesn't. Anyway, I'm so.
No, I know. It's just funny. The other ones haven't been bad. We get them like pretty early. You can tell where it's gonna go. Like they'll come in and they'll like start suggesting something. And you're like, I know where you're going with this. Boop.
They need to understand that we are expert TAs. We know where you're going. We know what you're trying to do to like subtly suggest something, but then it's secretly a fascist idea. Like, I'm here for it, and I'm not gonna let it happen.
Yep, and we shut that shit down. Our chat is a fascist-free chat. No fashion. Fascism? Fashion? Oh, now I can't even fucking speak.
No fashion in the chat.
No fashion. All fashion. All of the time.
Jody, put on your sunglasses again.
I just did.
We need that fashion back. Okay. It hadn't showed up on stream yet. Well, nice. Fuck yeah.
Last little thing about Texas I wanted to mention, because like that's all shitty. If there happens to be anyone in America and anyone who knows anyone from Texas who abortion might be something that they will need in the future, there was a good podcast that was either released today or yesterday by It Could Happen Here. And the podcast was about self-managed abortions in your community.
Yes.
And how to like locally organize around that. And so I recommend checking that out. It's sad that this is where things have ended up. But if you are in a situation where you can't, for whatever reason, go through proper channels to get this done, having community supports that can circumnavigate this shit can be helpful if you're in that circumstance.
Yeah, folks, here, I'll put it in the chat. One of my favorite providers in Canada, who I see as the new Henry Morgenthaler, because he is a gay gynecologist, at Birth Control Doc on Twitter. His name's Dustin Costescio. He's in Hamilton. He is fantastic, and he tweeted a thread that I just shared about self-managed abortion after this, after the law was passed. And Women on Web is the group that does a lot of this navigation stuff globally, as far as helping people get access to the abortion pill when they are not able to access the medication that will start a miscarriage for you if you are not able to access an abortion in your own community. And that was something that was already happening in the US before this law happened. Like, people, interestingly, even on I volunteer on the National Access Line, which in Canada, so in Canada, if you're looking for where to go, there's choiceconnect.ca, which is a website that I used to manage. That is a digital directory that has all of the closest abortion provider to you. Like, it uses Google Maps, and so you just put in your city, or the Action Canada Access Line. But I have had calls from the US before of folks being like, oh, can I get pills from you? And it's like, first of all, no, because we don't do abortions. We just provide access advice. But also, like, the answer is no. Like a lot of Canadians seem to think, and this was something I saw 3 years ago, like when the Trump stuff was all happening, where it was like, oh, well, we can have people come to Canada and like stay with us and get abortions. And I got like in trouble with someone from high school. I think they unfollowed me because they were like, you're being mean, like saying that you can't do that. But it's just like, first of all, No. Like, every city in Canada does not have an abortion provider. The people I was alluding to was Kelowna, which is where I'm from. And yes, there's a clinic there, but it is one of the most toxic communities in Canada, and it is very hard to get an appointment because the demand is so high because there's so few providers there. And so, like, the idea that, like, we would just fly someone up from America and, like, that would not be, like, the cost of it at the hospital. It varies based on hospital fees. Like, it is not accessible here. So how do you think that we're going to take this influx of refugees, abortion people from the United States, which will happen when Roe falls? Because Roe is going to fall. Like, that is essentially, like, my experts, like I said, at Rewire.news, who I listen to, like, they're the only ones that I know are telling me what is happening, and they can really break down these laws because they are meant to be misleading. Is because the Supreme Court failed to, like, stop the law, that was essentially this will be overturned this fall. And I don't know if folks saw, but yesterday the U.S. Department of Justice, led by Merrick Garland, came forward, and, like, their solution is, like, much of what the Biden administration is doing. It's half-assed. It's not going to help people. They're trying to reinforce the FACE Act, which is in the 90s, both in the US and Canada. The US, it was a national law to essentially help clinics with protesters so that they could be civilly and criminally charged for things, because that was when all the clinics were getting bombed by Operation Rescue, which is the super extremist group. Like, you want to tie the anti-vax movement, like, look up Operation Rescue and their tactics. Like, that's what's coming. And so Merrick Garland has said that's what they're looking to do, is enforce the FACE Act. And it's like essentially what Amani Gandhi and Jess Mason-Piccolo, who are the experts at Rewire, argue, and I agree with them, is that like the act was passed in the 90s, and all of these other things have happened since. Like, Dr. Chiller was killed in 2009. Like, what? Like, you're going to try and enforce this law? Like, that is not going to solve all of these issues. And so it's going to become a state-by-state access issue. And places like Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, those states will no longer have abortion providers. And then other states will. But with the U.S., it's clinic by clinic because they don't have a universal medical system, right? And so it really will depend on where you live and what types of clinics are available and who is available and all of these things, what procedure you will be able to have access to. And that is horrifying and scary for folks, because abortion isn't something that you can just push off. I don't know if you know this, but if you wait 9 months, a baby is born.
You could just hold it in there forever, right?
And the other thing is the Texas bill itself is anti-science, and this is where, like, our whole conversation kind of, like, has gone to. So the other part of the bill, apart from the snitch part, which is horrifying, is that it bans abortions after 6 weeks. And 6 weeks into a pregnancy, and I'm going to use the right language here because I specifically looked it up to make sure, and I learned all this when I was developing Canada's first pro-choice pregnancy support program. So at 6 weeks, it is not a fetus, it is an embryo, and it is not, so it's considered a heartbeat ban, right? Like, the idea that you can see a heartbeat at 6 weeks, that's not true. That is scientifically false. At that point, it is a provider detecting cardiac activity in the embryo. And so it is the pregnant person's heart and their neurological activity connecting to another part of their body, and cells that are evolving at a rapid rate. So I'm sorry, but that is not a child.
Viable.
That is the same, like it is cells. It is a clump of cells. And so, and most people, because pregnancy is based on your last menstrual period, you will not find out that you are pregnant until at least 4 weeks in, because usually people's cycles are like 26-ish days, right? So there we go. So you're already at 4 weeks when you're finding out that you are pregnant. You haven't made a choice. So best case scenario, you go right away and you get an abortion, but otherwise you're fucked.
Yeah. And I don't know if, your sources that you're into have stated this, but like a lot of the stuff that I read, the lawyers are saying that like we should stop talking about it in terms of like Roe v. Wade will be overturned, because this functionally does overturn Roe v. Wade. It's already done.
Yes.
And the other thing, like especially with the viability thing, because that was Casey versus Planned Parenthood, I think was the decision, right? And it's like it's not. I mean, everyone's focusing on Roe v. Wade, but like they made a specific case on viability, and like this 6-week distinction goes directly against that Supreme Court precedent.
Yeah.
Like
Casey, and that's early 90s.
Yeah.
Like that's like I think 92, Casey versus Planned. Yeah, so those are the two cases that are like the case law around this for folks who are like watching it, as far as and then the other one would be, we had like in terms of targeted abortion laws, Texas had a friggin' Supreme Court decision in like this was like 5 years ago. Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt is Texas, is it not? This is gonna bother me if I don't look it up.
Tim said, yep, my myocardial tissue inherently twitches with electrical activity, and those cells have just differentiated at that point. But calling it a heart is completely inaccurate. It's not providing blood to any organs, least of all the brain, which has not formed at all yet.
Right? And the thing is, historically, this is where I go back to my historian self. Like, pregnant people did not believe that an abortion was a thing prior to what's called the quickening, which is around 20 weeks, which is when you can start to feel the fetus move inside your body. And so historically, that is the point at which we as humanity ethically debated, is this okay or not, in terms of like, this is bad, you're killing a thing. Prior to that, we just got normal again. It was like, oh, I don't have my period, I need to take something, so I'm normal. So like, we didn't see it as the like this idea of baby at conception is actually an extremist Christian 1970s United States position that is white supremacist and anti-science.
And as we've mentioned on a previous stream, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there is a section where they discuss creating an abortifacient to terminate a pregnancy. And they don't condemn it. They don't say it's bad. They list the ingredients so you can make it and take it yourself.
Why not?
It's
just a normal thing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's just, I love that this got taken up by the Christian community as their thing. And when it's like, in your holy text, it does not condemn it and offers instructions on how to do it. Like, it just gets to a point where this is just clearly absurd.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.